Did you know that the 7 mysteries of Honjo actually exist in the real world? It's actually kind of crazy, but if you go to Honjo, Japan, you can actually find plaques about all of these different 7 wonders. And on top of that too, there are actually 9 of them that exist in real life. And so when Paranormasight came and actually pulled these mysteries together, they all kind of already exist in the real world. Of course, the story behind the 7 mysteries, referred to as the Honjo Incident in the game, that might be a little bit of editorializing, but it does paint a really interesting picture as to how all of these 7 mysteries, I should just say 9 mysteries at this point because we know that there's 9 of them, how all of these 9 mysteries are all connected together, telling this whole entire story. So without further ado, let's talk about what actually happened back in the Honjo Incident as described by Paranormasight, and of course, big spoilers for the end of the game. Now, while these 7 mysteries don't actually impact the end of the game at all, I still think that it is really interesting, and although you unlock the data file, you actually have to go in and read through it to really understand what happened way before the actual events of Paranormasight happened. It does provide a lot of context around this whole Rite of Resurrection, where everything kind of came from, and is just genuinely an interesting story. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So the story takes place in the Edo period in Japan, which is about the early 1600s, and basically just think very basic technology, samurai, all of that type of stuff was still very prevalent back in the day. This all starts off following a man named Jinkichi, who was an Netsuke craftsman, with his wife, Koma, and his daughter, Toki, when they took in a man who was on the run and battered and just on the brink of death. This man was Tsuchi Makaido Simon, who is an onmyoji. This is basically a word to describe someone who was like into the spirits and all that type of stuff, the supernatural. And Simon had been researching the Rite of Resurrection. Now, he had been researching it purely just for the academic sense, just really interested into that whole spiritual, mystical elements, all of that type of stuff. But upon learning that the only way to perform the Rite of Resurrection was actually by killing a bunch of people and collecting their soul dregs, his family more or less kicked him out and sent him on the road, and he had been on the run since. While against using the Rite of Resurrection, Simon thought it would be worth to use it actually for the family, but Jinkichi told him, you know what, no, I don't want anything to do with it. If it has something to do with killing others in order to bring someone back to life, that's just not really worth it. And Simon really appreciated this sentiment. Now, Toki, their daughter, overheard all of this discussion about resurrection and really didn't quite understand what was actually going on, but she was overseen by old man Konzo quite often, and she told him about all of these different things just kind of through her own childish brain. Now, Konzo was a ukiyo-e artist. Think like, the picture with the giant waves and stuff like that. It's a very traditional Japanese art style. He was one of those painters. But when he heard about all of this actually inspired him to start making paintings all related to this whole thing of the Rite of Resurrection and the idea of what resurrection even was. Now, these paintings actually became very popular in town, and Jinkichi, understanding that, maybe this whole resurrection thing could be something to bank on, started to make Netsuke connected to Konzo's paintings in order to just create some sort of elaborate business together where they could be like, yes, the Rite of Resurrection, these are blessings from beyond and all of that type of stuff, basically just bolstering the business to a substantial amount. Now, the thing was, though, as these pieces became incredibly popular and started to spread throughout town, people started talking to one another. Basically, one lady named Ashino actually heard about this, and she was a female onmyoji who was interested in actually capturing Simon from the very beginning. Turns out she was the one who actually wanted him to look into the Rite of Resurrection, and upon him being able to finally learn what you needed to actually do, he took the secrets and basically ran away because she wanted to use it to basically preserve her beauty for all time, and Simon didn't think that was necessarily worth the Rite of Resurrection being used on that. And so she actually recruited one of the local daimyos, basically a lord in ancient Japan, and had him track down old man Konzo in order to try and understand what information he knew. She then took Konzo into her own little fortress and basically started beating him, torturing him for lack of better terms, in order to try to get any information that he had out of the Rite of Resurrection from him. After getting pretty much as they could out of this old guy, they actually ended up beating him to death, and this is where the Taiko of Tsugaru curse comes from. It is actually Konzo being beaten to death, much like the whole taiko drum being beat thing. So that's where that's all connected there. From the information she was able to gather, the soul dregs were important, but most importantly, she learned that Jinkichi was the one who had the person in there and learned about the Rite of Resurrection through him, and so obviously her next target was Jinkichi. So she formally summoned Jinkichi to her quarters and then proceeded to capture him and start to torture him, trying to get any information about Simon and the location of the Record of Fates that Simon had told him about, basically recording how the whole Rite of Resurrection works in the first place. But the thing was Jinkichi actually did a really good job of not saying a single thing at all. And, well, they killed him before he could actually say anything. And so as a result, that was just kind of a dead end right there. The daimyo then took him and actually hung him from a beech tree and then publicly declared that he was too guilty about lying about this whole story of resurrection to everybody. And as a result, he had decided to take his own life, which basically this is the story of the Evergreen Breach. Now, the whole idea here was basically Ashino wanted to stop anybody trying to pursue the Rite of Resurrection so she could have it all for herself. And this basically just started a bunch of rumors as to, you know what, maybe that thing wasn't actually true. Let's not even bother to look into it or really care about this whole resurrection thing anymore. But unfortunately, a dancer who had actually witnessed the whole death of Jinkichi started to tell everybody that actually there were nefarious means behind this whole thing. And really, Jinkichi's death wasn't exactly what they had said when they announced that he was too guilty. Then the residents of Honjo started to believe that this was some sort of elaborate cover-up. Maybe resurrection does exist, and the rumors started to go even more so. And so the daimyo actually found the girl then and struck her a deal. She would retract her statements, and when she was done so, she would be able to perform on the largest stage in the state, or wherever, just the largest stage in general. Sadly though, turns out this stage was on top of this whole parade display upon which they put a bunch of glue inside of her mask, and so when she put on her mask, she then promptly suffocated because she couldn't breathe and fell off of one of these parade floats. As you could probably guess, this is the Fool's Procession. Meanwhile, with all of this shenanigan about resurrection going on and stuff like that, Jinkichi left behind Koma and Toki. And Koma didn't believe anything that was going on about her husband committing suicide. And so she started to ask anyone and everyone about any sort of information related to the daimyo, who was the one who announced that her husband had killed himself. And so the daimyo started to get a little bit scared. You know, he had just dealt with this other girl who started telling the truth out there, and suddenly this other woman is going around. And so he recruited a rogue ronin named Tomezo to go and confiscate her. However, in this confrontation, she started cursing him, blaming him, yelling at him, and just really just tore into Tomezo. Eventually, Tomezo got so frustrated and angry that he cut her down in broad daylight and, well, cut her arm and leg off, which is the origins of the one-sided reed. Feeling guilty and responsible and angry at the daimyo for putting him on this quest on the first place, he took responsibility for his own failure by committing seppuku and exposed the entire daimyo's plot before his death by a soba cart, which used to give coded signals back in the day to the military. And this is the curse behind the ever-burning lantern. And so then, with both of her parents completely just missing from action, Toki had no idea what was going on. And on top of that too, old man Konzo, who was doing the paintings, had also just disappeared off the face of the earth. She was left alone. And she stayed alone for as long as she could, but one night she actually wandered out trying to find her parents, and so she went back to the canal where she used to go with her family all the time, but unfortunately slipped and then fell into the canal, drowning, which then starts the curse of the Whispering Canal. And so that leads us back to the daimyo, who was really busy with just covering his tracks for the longest time on Jinkichi, but the fact of the matter was Ashino wanted him to track Simon down and he just simply hadn't made progress. And so one of the nights, Ashino went to the daimyo's house and set it on fire, burning down everything inside of it, including the daimyo himself, which is how the Haunting Clapper's curse starts. But actually, all of these deaths up until now were super beneficial for Ashino, because secretly this entire time she'd been collecting all of the soul dregs from all of these murders that had been going on, and now got to a point where she had enough to perform the Rite of Resurrection. She just needed the information on how to actually do so. With all of this craziness going on in Honjo, Simon actually caught wind of this and decided that he would come back in order to figure out what was happening, and was devastated upon his return to see he was too late and all of these murders had happened. But he also realized that all of the soul dregs from these bodies were completely absent, and so he had an idea that something fishy was going on. And so he confronted Ashino on Hoanji Bridge, where they basically just had like a wizard battle, except with curses, but it was on a bridge, and basically there was all these lights that were going off in the skies, and the residents of Honjo didn't really understand what was going on, but just saw all these lights happening. But through all of this, Simon was actually defeated, giving way to the beckoning light curse. But before he actually died, he was able to curse Ashino's foot. And so Ashino, escaping the duel afterwards, thinking she was victorious, by the way, her foot started to swell up with corruption and just started to become really gross. And so she barged into a mansion and demanded that they wash her foot on the spot. The cursed corruption just spread throughout the rest of her body, and she died inside of the mansion, leading way to the foot washing machine. And while that wraps up all of the curses, well, Simon actually came back to life. Understanding that Ashino had collected enough of the soul dregs there, knew that the soul dregs were going to be around, and cast a spell to activate upon his death that would invoke the Rite of Resurrection to bring him back to life so he could make sure that something like the Honjo Incident could never happen again. However, Ashino took the Record of Fates with her when she left the entire place, and so Simon had no idea where this thing was anymore. And so he used the remaining soul dregs and imbued them into 9 Natsuki figurines that Jinkichi had originally made and turned them into ritual implements to be sealed away in Honjo to reawaken if anybody ever started the Rite of Resurrection again. You might recognize these things because they are actually the curse stones that go throughout the game and are all related to these whole deaths that had occurred during the Honjo Incident. And so basically with this spell, all of these pieces would reawaken if someone was trying to do the whole Rite of Resurrection again, and then that would pass down these stories as to try and deter them from seeking the rite, because then they would understand what a bloody mess that this whole Honjo Incident did. Ironically, didn't quite work out as he had originally planned, I would like to think, because then people seeing the curse stones were like, yes, sure, that was a creepy memory, but now I've got an instrument in order to perform the rite. So it kind of backfired on that part. But of course, the other thing that he did was he wrote down everything he remembered about this whole Rite of Resurrection and threw it into the Yin Scroll, which then he passed down in 2 parts to his descendants, which obviously plays a big part in the main Paranormasight story. And so over the years, these very bizarre incidents in Honjo, obviously they didn't really make sense to all of the different townspeople, and so they turned into legends and eventually turned into the 7 mysteries of Honjo, which allegedly are the exact same ones that exist in today's day and age in Honjo, Japan. Obviously, this is a really interesting story that kind of connects everything together. It's kind of creepy and it's pretty well written, but whether or not this actually happened, I'm not going to speculate too much on that front. But it is kind of cool that the developers of this game decided to write something so rich based off of, once again, 9 things that already exist and are currently in Honjo, Japan. But okay, that wraps up this video. Even if you don't end up playing Paranormasight, the storyline is really interesting, and I don't see a lot of stuff out there that really goes into depth about this type of stuff, so I figured, you know what? I'd like to share this with people because I thought this was honestly just a really cool story here. If not, if anything, it's just like a little Japanese creepypasta for people to kind of listen into. But let me know if you thought this was interesting, or if you've actually played Paranormasight. Please let me know, because I'm convinced that I'm literally the only person on Earth who has played this game. But that is going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you did enjoy it, and I will catch you in the next video as well. Take it easy, everybody.